All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order and roll call. I think the only is on, I think on personal business is Councillor Dowie. Rest are all here and present with our senior administration. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Is there any on this agenda as presented to you? None declared. I have that reflected. All right, introduction. And the purpose of the meeting is to hear public comment on a proposed housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment to the Sandwich South zoning bylaw 85-18 pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act RSO 1990. And the purpose of the proposed housekeeping amendment is to restrict cannabis greenhouse operations in the agricultural A zone of zoning bylaw 85-18 in accordance with the policies of the newly adopted town of Tecumseh official plan. The newly adopted official plan establishes that cannabis greenhouse operation are not permitted as a right in the agricultural designation and are only permitted by way of site-specific zoning bylaw amendments that are required to meet a number of locational and design criteria. Mr. Hillman, is there anything else you would add at this stage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, Council and administration. Actually, Mr. Mayor, that was a fairly succinct summary. And I would only add that these are changes proposed to the zoning bylaw that occur through the Planning Act. And prior to Council making any revisions or amendments to the zoning bylaw, there is a public meeting required, which is the purpose of this evening, to see if there's any stakeholder input. And this is something of a housekeeping nature to bring the bylaw in zoning in synchronization with the official plan and the policies that have been set through that document. You'll recall that Council already gave passage to a site plan bylaw to make greenhouses and cannabis greenhouses subject to site plan control at our last meeting, which was part of the report that is in front of Council. And tonight specifically is just regarding a proposal to amend the zoning bylaw to not permit cannabis greenhouses as of right, but require that they go through a rezoning site specific subject to criteria that are set out in the official plan to consider it at a future date. So it just brings the planning documents sort of into conformity. So for this evening, the intent is to hear any comments or try and address questions. And ultimately at regular Council, the bylaw will be put on for consideration. So Mr. Mayor, that's really I think all the is certainly the introductory comments that I have.
Okay, any questions? I know there's no delegations this evening, but I'm gonna an opportunity for members of council if you want to address Mr. Hillman, and at this stage, yes, Councillor Jobin.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Hillman. So there's different components to greenhouse and cannabis, and as we know, we're having some public conversations to retail facilities as well. So this is in reference to greenhouses, but it draws attention to the outdoor grow of cannabis that could be a rural, like an agricultural farm, could be an outdoor farm. Can you maybe define the differences and how that can be related in difference to a greenhouse and site plan control and odors? This is just one step in the process of greenhouses with the cannabis. Just do you understand what I'm getting at with the three parts to this and how people are rating it, and they have to be divided up?
Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor. So yeah, maybe right back to the first observation. This is completely unrelated to retail sale. That's a different process and in fact, different legislation and is subject to consideration by council. That is now on a public consultation platform at the town, with a report coming back to council around the notion of opting in, as it's called. We are now, as a community, we opted out by virtue of a council decision some time ago. So that's a completely separate issue. Before council this evening is in relation to greenhouse operations specifically. These are the operations that have historically been shown to having elements that require a higher degree of consideration from a planning perspective. And as council can be, as you're aware, agricultural production in Ontario, and certainly in the Essex County context, is very highly protected from provincial policy. So the starting point is the emphasis from a policy perspective is to protect farmland, to allow farm operators a broad spectrum of uses that they can, and product and crops that they can grow. And of course, we have some of the best land in the province. So that's sort of the starting point. Greenhouse operations have generally come to, given the scale and scope that we're seeing in particularly the other regions of Essex County, come with some factors that need to be addressed through the planning process, usually in relation to light for crops grown in a greenhouse that are food crops. With cannabis production, it has been seen that there are elements of odor that can occur at certain times. So there are different methodologies to address that when you're in a confined space. And of course, once you're in a confined space with growing, it does seem to emit more of a concentrated release at certain times. So this is proposed for greenhouse cannabis operations. In terms of cannabis that could be grown under the Health Canada guidelines in your backyard or in a field condition, we've talked to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and really that is viewed as just a normal crop under normal conditions that wouldn't have site plan provisions, because really, when you think of site plan control, think of it, or zoning provisions, think of it as a regulatory environment where you are looking at certain aspects of a building or an operation that has attributes that you want to be sure you're regulating in some manner. Field crop does not fit into sort of the realm of that regulatory framework. But again, we did talk to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food just to confirm, are there certain areas where you're seeing some attempt at levels of control for field crop, and the answer was no. And it hasn't become as common or as intrusive as the greenhouse operations now. And so that's why we're bringing through the OP. There was a policy that spoke to this specific element of a cannabis greenhouse operation and the higher level of controls and the higher level of determining where they're appropriately placed, which would be through a rezoning process and addressing the criteria that are established in that process. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yes, it certainly does. And just because we do have these other, the next upcoming public input with our space for the retail, everybody just kind of puts it all under one umbrella, and it sort of is, it's the same product, but they fall under different policies and different regulations. So I just wanted to clarify that, as this meeting has drawn that question of concern. So thank you.
Okay. I hope that was clear then. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hillman. And thank you, Councillor Jobin, for the question. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Tonio.
Just to Mr. Hillman, is there currently in the province, of any fields that have marijuana growing in it without any fencing or protection? It's a product that people might want to steal. So that's, I think, the biggest deterrent of just opening up a field and planting marijuana out here. Do you know of any fields or plants that are like that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do not. I could not point one to you. I would know it if I saw it probably, but the ministry has certainly confirmed that it's a normal practice, and that you can go to other areas and we could find some, I'm sure, if we were to ask the right person. Yeah. But I have not seen one in our region, to be quite frank.
Yeah, but they're out there in Ontario. Yes, Ms. Evans.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just in answer to Councillor Tonio's question, my understanding is that there's a farm established in the Brantford area that is growing it out in open air.
Thank you.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Buchetti.
Thank you, Your Honor. Question, Mr. Hillman. This still allows the, whether it be council administration, when we go through the process, the planning process, appeal rights for those if they're not happy with, for example, site plan control, when we go through that public meeting sessions, there's still that process available to the residents or the community at large there that may not be in agreement of that application?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes. So yes, there are appeal rights. So that's one of the opportunities that becomes available to other persons who might have an interest. If a property owner were to come forward with an application, it would go through a public meeting, not unlike the one that we held at 5 o'clock this evening on a completely different residential matter. Notice would be provided, and stakeholders could provide input to council and be a part of the decision-making process in terms of their thoughts and views. Ultimately, council will make a decision one way or the other, or maybe not make a decision. Regardless of that, the Planning Act does establish appeal rights on zoning applications. So if council were not to make a decision on an application, there's timelines within which an applicant, of course, they have rights to. They could appeal something to the LPAT. If council supported an application, someone could appeal that. If you didn't support an application, the applicant could appeal. Or so there are appeal rights available, and it's intended to be a open and transparent process that people are brought into the decision-making process that way.
That's excellent. Thank you. That's good to know in terms of the local level. There's still that control where there's people out there that think it's just a federal jurisdiction and that the lower tier, the municipalities don't have any control in that regard. So that's excellent to hear. And again, we'll see where this takes us, because again, it's a new thing, a new opportunity for this cannabis industry, and the municipality will obviously have an active role in there. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could just partially just to clarify something as well. And I know that council quite often has seen various resolutions that have been coming through over the last number of years. And I know that there have been concerns in some jurisdictions that seem to relate to medical marijuana and the issue of how Health Canada licenses growing of medical marijuana, and how I, as someone, could take a number of your licenses and grow them on my property, which is sort of outside of the domain of the municipal processes, because Health Canada is working directly with their applicants. And I know that while I'm sitting with a board on AMO that's looking at that issue, we haven't faced it as prevalently in our area as some other areas where you see a lot of these resolutions coming through, where there's a bit of a disconnect between Health Canada and their regulatory environment and our police services and our municipal enforcement and planning jurisdictions. So, but that's sort of a very unique little nuance that's out there that's slightly different from these cannabis greenhouse operations. But so you still will hear probably people saying, oh, there's no local controls. There are elements of that happen out in the field of medical marijuana and Health Canada regulations and so on. And it's being worked on right now between Health Canada and AMO actually is trying to come up with some better frameworks that hopefully will come forward soon. So hopefully that, helps clear up that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's around Norfolk and Alderman County. They're having a lot of issues there, but they have a lot of licenses issued on the medical growing of cannabis. Here it's not so much. We've only got the one, I think, in the region. Originally, Afria was medical, and until the market opened, so it's a little tighter here. And but yeah, you're right, because I know Mr. Hillman through the Western Wardens Caucus, the mayor of Norfolk, was also part of that. It's been a nightmare, and so they need to tighten up on the license and dealing with that. So it's nice to be able to maybe hedge it a little bit here in terms of site plan control and other things that we can do to, I guess, try to start things at the right foot at the right time. I think that's, I think the introduction to this particular housekeeping item, I think is a good one. Any further questions to Mr. Hellman? Not, then I will move on to, there's 5 items of communications, and in particular, the 2 emails as well, to make sure that they're included on the minutes. So if I get a motion to receive those 5 items. Councillor Jobin and Deputy Mayor McKetty, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. We'll move on now to the report itself on the housekeeping amendment to the Sandwich South zoning bylaw 85-18, the restriction of cannabis greenhouse operations in the agricultural A zone in accordance with the policies of the Tecumseh new official plan scheduling of a public meeting. And so that report entitled Housekeeping Amendment to Sandwich South zoning bylaw 85-18, restriction of cannabis greenhouse operations in the agricultural A zone in accordance with the policies be received. Moved by Councillor Houston and Councillor Dowie, support. Any questions or comments on the report? Heard none, all in favor? Opposed, if any of that is carried. So that takes care of that. If there's any no further questions, comments, then an adjournment is in order. Councillor Altenhoff and Councillor Tonio. All in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. All right, thank you very much, members of council and administration. And I think we